Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Samich Vav. Yesterday we saw a machloket between Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer about what is the definition of something that's attached to the ground. Because the general rule is that when I sell you a house, then things that are permanently attached to the house and attached to the ground are sold along with it, but not movable items. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Kol hamichubad lakarka hareu kakarka. Anything attached to the ground is considered the ground, even if it was made into a vessel first. I took some wood thing and I carved it into a bowl, into a mortar, and then I attached it to the ground after. Right now it's attached to the ground. It's considered part of the ground according to the Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbanan, however, not so. If it was a utensil first and then I attached it to the ground, it's still considered a movable utensil. Only if I take something, I attach it to the ground first, just some block of wood, attach it to the ground, and then I form it into a utensil while it is attached to the ground. Only in that case would it be called attached to the ground. But if it was a utensil first and then later attached, it's not. That was the fundamental machloket between Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer. So we're going to discuss this further. Tenor Rabbanan. Sinor shechakako ulbasof keba'o posel et hamikveh. Keba'o ulbasof chakako eno posel et hamikveh. We have a baraita that is about the laws of a mikveh. A mikveh has to be filled with rainwater. However, if it's drawn water, if I take water into a pail first and I carry it and then pour it into the mikveh, then that's no good. At least the first 40 se'ah has to be non-drawn water. So let's say I have a duct. That would be a pipe. It could be a whole pipe or a half pipe. That just the bottom part. And so this pipe is attached to the ground. Now here's the thing. First, I hollowed it out. I took some wood or something, or stone, and I hollowed it out while it was not on the ground. So I made it a vessel. And then I attached it to the ground. So since it was a vessel first, and now I attached it to the ground, even though the water is coming from a natural source of water, rainwater, and it's going through this duct, it's no good because the duct was a vessel first. Even though right now it's attached to the ground, that's no good. That's considered mayim she'uvim. However, if first I attached it to the ground, I took some stone or something and I cemented it, attached it to the ground. And after it was attached to the ground, then I hollowed it out and made it into a shape of a pipe, then that's considered part of the ground. And it will not make the mikveh pasul because since it was just rainwater or water from a lake and it's coming directly from there and passing over the ground the whole time, even though it's through the channel, but the channel was made while this item was attached to the ground, so it never was a vessel first, then it's okay. That's what the Baraita says. Now our question is, Maneh, lo Rabbi Eliezer ve'lo Rabbanan. It seems that this Baraita is not the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, nor is it the opinion of Rabbanan. If it's not either of those two in some machloket that they talk about, then who could possibly be the author of this Baraita? Now, let's pause for a second and note that this Baraita and this question on the Baraita is from a different source. This is from a prior discussion. At some point, the rabbis analyzed this Baraita and they said it's not the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer nor that of Rabbanan, and this was a problem, this was a question, and then they had to find an answer to it. The thing is that when we just have this tradition, but we don't know what the context was when they were talking about it. We bring it in here now with this machloket that we just saw between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan to test it out. That's what we're going to do in a second. And we're going to show that it can't be this machloket, so we're going to bring two more possibilities, and we'll land on, in the third one, we'll land on a possibility where that makes sense that was the context where the rabbi said that. Okay, so just keep that in mind, and we're going to have a two-step process. First, we're going to have to figure out what was the issue that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan were arguing about. What issue did the rabbis have in mind when they said that this Baraita is neither opinion? So we have to make sense of that. And then after we find a candidate where there is a machloket that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan both don't fit into, cannot be the author of this baraita, then we're going to have to actually find an answer and show how at least either Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbanan actually can be the author of this baraita. So we're going to spend a lot of time, actually most of the time, finding the context in which neither of them can be the Braita, only to then figure out how at least one of them can be the author of this Baraita. So it's a long route, but let's get started. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer debayit. Which opinion of Rabbi Eliezer are we talking about? Maybe it's this one, the one that we just quoted, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion regarding selling a house, where he says that anything attached to the ground is in fact the ground. You see, that would be a good candidate for that discussion when they said this Baraita is not the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, because over here Rabbi Eliezer says that anything attached to the ground, even if it was a utensil first and then put in after, that's considered attached to the ground. This would not be in accordance with this Baraita, because this Baraita says if I make a pipe first out of the ground and then attach it to the ground, it's no good. It's considered a vessel, and the maim is maim shuvim. So actually, Rabbi Eliezer in this Baraita would be a good candidate for the rabbis to say that this Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of this Baraita. Notice for a minute that we're not talking about Rabbanan. They're only asking who Rabbi Eliezer is. In fact, actually, Rabbanan of our Baraita regarding the house would be a good candidate to be the author of this Baraita, because the Rabbanan in our Baraita regarding the house makes a distinction and says if you build a vessel first and put it in the ground, then it's not considered part of the ground. It doesn't go along with the sale. If you put something attached to the ground and then shape it into a mortar, into a bowl, then that is considered part of the ground, which is exactly the law here. If I make a pipe first and attach to the ground, it's a vessel. If I attach something to the ground and then shape it into a pipe, then it's considered part of the ground, and you can fill a mikveh with it. So Rabbanan actually could be the author of this Baraita, which would be a problem in itself, because we're looking for a source where neither Rabbi Eliezer nor Rabbanan could be the author. Okay, so even though actually our Baraita would not be a good candidate because Rabbanan could be the author here, we are nevertheless ignoring Rabbanan for the moment and trying to find a statement of Rabbi Eliezer, some issue that Rabbi Eliezer talks about where he would not be able to be the author of this Baraita. And so right now it seems that we found one, because Rabbi Eliezer in the house case is too lenient. He says anything that's attached to the ground is part of the ground, and here this Baraita regarding the mikveh makes a distinction whether it was built first or not. And so Rabbi Eliezer of the house is a good context for the commentary of the rabbis when they said that Rabbi Eliezer is not the author. That's our proposal, but then we reject that. No, maybe Rabbi Eliezer says regarding a house that anything attached to the ground is considered part of the ground only because he thinks that a seller sells generously, and therefore, since he's generous, anything that could possibly be interpreted as something attached to the ground, the seller says, that's yours. But that's a special law here. In general, when it comes to other laws, Rabbi Eliezer may very well agree with this principle that if it's made into a vessel first and only then attached to the ground, then that's considered a vessel. And he would agree with this Baraita. And in the case of a house, it's not a ritual law, it's a monetary law. And when it comes to monetary law, sellers generally are generous, according to him, and that's why it goes through. And if that's the reasoning for the Eliezer here, then the Rabbanan would say, no, a seller is not generous, and he is more of a stickler. And therefore, the seller would say, wait a second, this was a vessel first, and only then to attach to the ground. So that's not considered part of the ground. And so Rabbanan would follow the more general definition in ritual cases of what's called attached to the ground or not attached to the ground. Since Rabbi Eliezer can be actually reconciled with this Baraita, this cannot be the context in which the rabbis commented and said that this Baraita is not the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So we rejected this context. Let's look for another context where the rabbis would have commented and said this Baraita about Mikveh is neither the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer nor that of Rabbanan. Ve'ela Rabbi Eliezer de kaveret devorim ditnan. Kaveret devorim Rabbi Eliezer omer harehi kekarka vechotvin aleha peros bol. Maybe it's Rabbi Eliezer that is his opinion that he says regarding a beehive. This would be a man-made beehive. You make a beehive, and then you attach it to the ground, and then you let the bees come and fill it up with honey, and then at some point you go and take the honey. There's a Mishnah Shevi'it that says a beehive, Rabbi Eliezer says it's considered part of the ground, and you can even write a pidos bol on it, based on it. In order to write a pidos bol, if you owe me money and the Shivi'it year is coming, then I don't want it to cancel, so we could write a pidos bol. However, the borrower has to own land in order for that to work. So you have to own some piece of land, and here the Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that even a beehive is considered land. What does that mean? It means that a beehive is considered attached to the ground. It's considered part of the ground. It's also considered part of the ground regarding to make to buy or sell it. In order to acquire something, you have to make a transaction. Movable items, you have to move, pull, pick it up. Whereas karka, you can't pick it up, but you acquire it in other ways, like with money or with a shtad. So same thing with the beehive. In order to transfer ownership, it would transfer ownership like that of land. And furthermore, again, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, a beehive cannot receive tum'ah. That's because that's a general law. Anything that's attached to the ground does not receive tum'ah, like any fruits or vegetables that are attached to the ground. Even if a dead body touches them or anything, they don't get tum'ah. And so too, the honey, even the honey in the beehive, even though the honey is sloshing around in there, is movable, but it's kind of like it's growing in there, and that's considered, the whole thing is considered attached to the ground. Even though it was made outside as a vessel and then attached to the ground later, it's all considered attached to the ground. And lastly, the Rabbi Eliezer says that if someone takes some honey on Shabbat, they do it by mistake. They didn't realize it was asur, or they didn't realize it was Shabbat. They have to bring a chatat offering, because that's the same as kitzira. It's the same as harvesting, as cutting something off the ground. So again, this is because he considers something that was a vessel and then later attached to the ground to be attached to the ground for all of these laws. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Continuing the Mishnah, Hachamim omrim ena kekarka ve'en kotvin ala piros bo mekabel tumah b'mkomav harodem mena b'shabbat patur. Hachamim say it's not like the ground, and if you're going to buy or sell or acquire it, then you have to use the methods of movable items, and you cannot write a piros bol based on it. If the borrower owns no other land, only a beehive that he made detached and then attached to the ground, that's not good enough to write a piros bol. And if something tameh touches it, it will receive tumah because it's not considered part of the ground. And if someone takes honey from a beehive on Shabbat, they are not liable to bring korban chatat because it is not considered attached to the ground, and therefore it is not kesira. So let's apply this to our case. Since here Rabbi Eliezer thinks that something that was made as a vessel when it was detached and only later attached is considered attached to the ground, therefore Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of the Braita regarding the Mikveh, because regarding Mikveh, if I make a pipe separately and then attach it to the ground, that's considered not part of the ground. It's considered a vessel and maim she'uvim. So Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of the Braita. Since Rabbi Eliezer here is not consistent with the Braita, this is a good context for what the rabbis were discussing when they said their statement, Rabbi Eliezer is not the opinion of this Braita. So is this a good case? We reject it. Hatam kedama Rabbi Elazar ta'ama, dama Rabbi Elazar. It could be Rabbi Eliezer here. He was Rabbi Eliezer before. So this is as Rabbi Elazar. This Rabbi Elazar is Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat the Amora. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat said that Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana that we just read in the Mishnah regarding the beehive, Rabbi Elazar explained Rabbi Eliezer and said, "My Tama de Rabbi Eliezer. What is the reason? What is the source for Rabbi Eliezer when he says that a beehive attached to the ground is considered part of the ground? That has a special pasuk, tichtiv, vayitbol ota b'ya'arat hadebash. That it says regarding Yonatan, the son of Shaul, that he put his rod and he dipped into the honeycomb and took some honey. And it calls a honeycomb ya'arat ya'arat devash. A ya'ar means a forest. And so we learned from this, ma ya'arat holish mena b'shabbat chayav chatat, af devash harodeh mimena b'shabbat chayav hatat. Just like a forest, if someone would take something, pick something from a forest, that's called attached to the ground. If you do that on Shabbat, you'd be liable to chatat. So too, regarding honey, a honeycomb is called like a forest. In that, it's considered attached to the ground. And if you take from honey from the honeycomb on Shabbat, you'd be chayav chatat. And because of that, that brings along all the other consequences of this law. That even though here it's a vessel first and then you attach it to the ground, it's considered part of the ground. But that's only because of a special gezerata katuv, a special pasuk, that says that a beehive is attached to the ground. But in general, Rabbi Eliezer may very well hold that something that is a vessel, made a vessel first and only attached to the ground after, is considered a vessel. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer could be the author of the Baraita regarding the mikveh, because here, beehive, don't ask me about that. That's a special thing because there's a special pasuk that says it's always considered attached to the ground no matter what, even if it was detached before. But in general, the Eliezer may agree that if you make a pipe separately, it's a vessel, and then attach it to the ground, then that's still called a vessel. And he could be the author of the Baraita. Since he could be the author of the Baraita, that cannot, this beehive, Rabbi Eliezer, cannot be the context in which the rabbi said that Rabbi Eliezer is not the author of the Baraita. So, this is off the table. And finally, we have the last candidate that we will accept. Ela Rabbi Eliezer de daf ditnan daf shanachtomim shekabau bakotel Rabbi Eliezer metaher hachamim metameim. It's Rabbi Eliezer regarding a board. A daf is a utensil that has no sides. It's just a single board. And the Mishnah in Masechet Kelim says that a baker's board, this would be a board that he like a countertop that's attached to the wall, and he would put his bakery goods on it to sell. So this kind of board that he attached to the wall. Now note here, it does not say that there's any difference between whether he shaped the board first, he planed it and sanded it, and then attached it to the wall, or whether he attached this block of wood to the wall and then later shaped it, sanded it. So it makes no difference either way. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's tahor. It's considered attached to the ground, and therefore anything attached to the ground or attached to the wall, attached to the house, cannot receive tumah. It's not susceptible to tumah. Whereas the Chamim say it is tameh. So we see that here, according to Rabbi Eliezer, even if I made made it a vessel first, I planed this block of wood first into a board and then attached it to the wall. Still, it's considered attached to the ground. See, Rabbi Eliezer says anything attached to the ground is always attached to the ground, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of our Baraita regarding a mikveh, because over there, if I make it into a vessel, a pipe first, and then attach it, it's still considered a vessel. And so Rabbi Eliezer says here, not so. So now we're good. We found a case where, according to Rabbi Eliezer, something is always attached to the ground, and he therefore would be too machmir when it comes to the mikveh. By the way, this also works for Chachamim here. Chachamim say it's tameh no matter what. It's considered a vessel, even if I attached it first and then made it into a vessel, it's still considered a vessel, its own entity, and therefore can receive tumah. If we apply that opinion to our Mishnah regarding the mikveh, see that Chachamim would be a problem. According to Chachamim, it's considered a vessel no matter what. Even if I attach it to the ground and then hollow it out into a pipe, that would be called a vessel, and it would be ma'im shuvin, no matter what. So therefore, we finally found a source where neither Rabbi Eliezer nor Chachamim can be the authors of our Mishnah, of that Baraita, as we now explain. Mani, Rabbi Eliezer afilu chakakol basof keba'o, Rabbanan afilu keba'ol basof chakakol nameh. So who is the author of this Baraita? Remember, the Baraita regarding a mikveh makes a distinction and says, if you made it a pipe first and then attached it to the ground, it's a ma'im shuvin, that's a vessel. If, on the other hand, you put the block in, fix it to the ground, and then made it a vessel, then it's okay. then it's not Mayim She'uvim, it's considered attached to the ground. So, if we say this Baraita is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, then even if he first hollowed it out and then attached it to the ground, Rabbi Eliezer says it's considered attached to the ground, and therefore it should be permitted. So it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. And if it's Rabbanan, even if I attached it to the ground and then hollowed it out, it should still be considered a vessel, and it would be no good. But the Baraita has the middle opinion. See, Baraita has a middle opinion, and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan here are on each of the extreme opinions and make no distinction between the order. Rabbi Eliezer thinks it's always attached to the ground as long as attached to the ground. The Rabbanan thinks it's always a vessel, no matter when you made it into a vessel, without any distinction of whether it was attached first or attached after it was a vessel. Good. We finished step 1 of finding the context in which the rabbis commented and said this Baraita is neither the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbanan. Thank you. Now that we did that, now we have to solve the question and say, well, who is the author? Because we don't want to leave a floating baraita that's according to nobody. And so we answer, in fact, the baraita regarding the mikveh can be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. When it came to the baker's tray, there it's different, because that is a flat item, a flat vessel that's made out of wood, and a flat vessel that's made out of wood is actually not tameh mideoraita, it's only tameh midrabanan. And that's why Rabbi Eliezer is especially lenient. He says, listen, the whole tum'ah of this kind of vessel, even just detached, right, this kind of vessel, no matter what happens to it, deoraita, it cannot become tameh, because only a vessel that can hold water, that can hold something with sides on it, that is considered a vessel mideoraita. So since really it cannot become tameh at all, we only say can become tameh midrabanan, the rabbis wanted to make a gezerah just to be careful, because this is a kind of thing that is sometimes used. Fine. If it's totally detached, it can become tameh midrabanan. But here the Rabbi Eliezer says, as long as it's attached to the wall, it doesn't matter when, even if it was a vessel first and then you attach it to the wall, we can be lenient and consider it part of the wall, because the whole thing is the Rabbanan. However, when it comes to a deoraita law, like a mikveh, there he would make a distinction and say, if you put it in the ground first and then made it into a vessel, fine, it's attached to the ground. But if it's made it into a pipe first and then attached to the ground, no, this is deoraita. Then he would say it's considered still a vessel and it's not attached to the ground, and it's Mayim She'uvim. So there you go. We can solve the problem and find an author. In fact, this would be Eliezer. We're going to reject this on 2 accounts. Number 1, Miklal de She'iba deoraita. First of all, you're assuming this whole time that drawn water is a problem mideoraita. In fact, v'hakai malan d'Rabbanan. This is a big surprise. And Rambam actually is posek halacha like this, that Mayim She'uvim is only a problem midrabanan. On the deoraita level, as long as you have a pool of water that has 40 se'ah, it's a kosher mikveh, no matter what. Even if you have used drawn water, the whole law of having rainwater go in is only a derabanan requirement. That's at least the Rambam, who is very lenient on this. Rashbam here says, hold on, not so fast. Rashbam says, talking about a case where you have a mikveh 40 se'ah. The first 40 se'ah was rainwater, you did it properly. And the problem is then that you added some more drawn water, and you took away an equal amount of the rainwater, then that's the problem. Midrabanan, the rabbis don't want you to do that. If you want to just add, fine. But you can't add and take away such that there's less than 40 se'ah of the original rainwater that you put into it. Okay, in any case, Rambam is simpler. So according to Rambam, drawn water is only a problem with Rabbanan. So therefore, actually, you should be lenient regarding a mikveh, and not only regarding a wooden board. And just like a wooden board, you say, you know what, we'll be lenient, it's attached to the ground, it's fine. so too, because it's the Rabbanan, so too regarding drawn water of a mikveh, that whole issue is the Rabbanan. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer should be lenient and say, it doesn't matter when you made it into a vessel, even if you made the pipe first and then attached it to the ground, we should call it attached to the ground and let the mikveh be permitted. And so, you see, Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of this baraita. That's problem number one. And even if you would solve that somehow, that Mishnah regarding the baker's tray, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Chanina, said that wasn't talking about a wooden board, but rather a metal board. And a metal board becomes tameh mideoraita. So it's actually the opposite of what we thought. We were trying to say that Rabbi Eliezer is the author because a wooden board is the Rabbanan and Maim Shuvim is deoraita. It's actually the exact opposite. We're talking about a metal board. That's deoraita, and so he should be machmir, if anything, regarding that. And not the mikveh, because the mikveh is only midrabanan. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer cannot be the author of that baraita. But now that opens up a new possibility. The olam rabanan hi v'shani sheiba rabanan. The Batra is the opinion of Rabbanan regarding the board. Now, regarding the board, now we said it's a metal board, which is Doraita. In that case, Rabbanan said, you know what? It's always considered a vessel, a separate vessel, no matter what, whether you made it before or after. Even if you attach it first and then plane it into a vessel, it's mikabel tum'ah. We'd consider it not part of the wall because it's a metal vessel. It's Doraita. Problem. That's why he makes no distinction. But when it comes to mayim she'uvim, drawn water, that he says is only a problem with Rabbanan, and therefore we can be lenient regarding a mikveh and say that if you attached the item first and then the stone or wood first and then turned it into a pipe, so we'll consider that part of the ground and the mikveh is kosher because we'll be lenient when it comes to a mikveh. Last question. Hold on. If the whole Maim Shuvim is only the Rabbanan and you want to be Mekel, then you should be Mekel all the way and say, even if I made the pipe first, when it was separate, I made a separate vessel, just a pipe, and then attached it to the ground, so I should be lenient and say, even that is okay, and the mikveh is kosher. How come Rabbanan made the distinction, right? Again, assuming that they are the author of that baraita, and the answer is, Shane Atam, Te'ika Torat Keli Alav Betalush. No, there it's different, because it's definitely called a vessel when it's detached. This is a pipe. Therefore, even though you're right, it's only midrabanan, but still it's very similar to just using drawn water, just using a pail. And therefore, the Rabbanan gezerah extended from using a pail and pouring water to a pipe also, even though you attach it to the ground. Those things are too similar. And the rabbi said, no, the Maim Shovim, that is also considered Maim Shovim. But if you put this thing in the ground first and then turned it into a pipe, then already it doesn't seem like a pail that you would use, and the rabbis did not make a gezerah in that case. So there you go. Finally, we found the original context in which the rabbi said that this baraita of mikveh is not Rabbi Eliezer and not Rabbanan, and once we found that original context, then we were able to solve their question also and explain that in fact this baraita is the opinion of Rabbanan, and we end up with the tremendous chidush according to Rambam, and some Shulchan Aruch also follows that Maim Shuvim is asur only midrabanan. We finished the daf with one more application of this machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. Ba'e Rav Yosef, Megeshamim shechashav alehem lehadiach et ha'itz terublin, mahu lizra'im. There's a general rule that in order for food to be susceptible to becoming tameh, it has to first get wet by one of 7 liquids, including water, and that has to get wet with the will of the owner. The owner has to want it to get wet. So, like for example, if you have a fresh apple, when it's attached to the ground, it cannot become tameh no matter what happens. If you detach it to the ground, even if it touches something tameh, it does not become tameh until you wash it, and you want that water to go on it. If it happens to get tameh, it happens to get wet, but you didn't want it to get wet, then it still remains not susceptible to tum'ah. That is the general rule. Now, if you have, let's say, rain, and I want the rain to go onto the ground, to water the ground, but I don't want that very same water to make the apple wet, then that doesn't count. It does not make the apple susceptible to tum'ah. Okay, with that, this is the source is because it says ki yutan, if water is placed on it, but you can read it yiten, if water, he puts water on it. So that means even if water went on it by itself, with like rainwater, but it has to be only in a case where he would want to put water on it. He would want it to get wet. All right, with that background, we have the case as follows. Let's say you have rainwater that the owner says, oh, I'm so glad this rainwater is coming down and it will go on the lower millstone. This is the millstone that's attached to the ground, and it will wash the millstone. So he's happy about that. Now, there is also grain, detached grain, that's next to the millstone, or on the millstone, that will also get wet. So here's the question. Does the grain that's near the millstone, that's also getting wet from the same water, does that become susceptible to tum'ah or not? Well, what will it depend on? It'll depend on the status of the lower millstone. If the lower millstone is considered a movable object, then he wants the rain to wash a movable object, and therefore, when it washes the grain also, that's considered washing. He wants that water for a movable object, and therefore, it's considered that he wants it to get wet, and it does become tameh. However, if you consider the lower millstone attached to the ground, then he wants the water to water the ground. That doesn't count as wanting the water on movable items, and therefore, even though the grains get wet, it's not by his will, and it's not susceptible to tum'ah. And so that's the explanation here. Alibad Rabbi Eliezer da'amar, kol mechubad lakarka, harehu kekarka, lati ba'elach. Kiti ba'elach, alibad Rabbanan, damre eno kekarka, mai teko. You know what? According to Rabbi Eliezer, who says, anything attached to the ground is considered part of the ground, even if you made this millstone beforehand, when it was detached from the ground, and it was a separate vessel, and then you later attached it to the ground, right now it's considered part of the ground. Don't ask the question according to Rabbi Eliezer, because he thinks it's definitely part of the ground, and therefore it would be a simple answer. This water that's raining and coming onto this lower millstone, it's the same as if it was just going onto the field. And if it then happens to make some food wet, it will not become susceptible to tum'ah. So it's not a question according to Rabbi Eliezer, but rather only a question according to Rabbanan, because Rabbanan say, well, it depends if it was made before, if it was made after, and it has an in-between status. And so this question would only apply according to Rabbanan. Do you consider this millstone to be attached to the ground, and therefore it's not tameh, or would you consider it detached to the ground because it was a vessel before, or because it's a vessel now? What would you say about that? And that question we leave unresolved. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.